How's it going, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the Mavs Step Back Podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Trigg. I am rejoined by my co-host, Drew Johnson. Man, it's been a week, hasn't it, DJ? We've gone through all the emotions of the Luka trade yet again. It's been over 2 months now, but his return to Dallas on Wednesday, reopened some of those wounds. Reopened the scab. It was something to witness. It was something I've never seen in all my years. Watching NBA basketball and Mavs basketball. Just given the circumstances. Ironically enough, Wednesday night when the Lakers played at American Airlines Center was exactly 6 years to the day that Dirk played his final home game and then had that ceremony afterwards where he announced his retirement, and it was a big emotional scene, and it was something you'll never forget. Well, 6 years later, you have Luka Doncic in the building, his return to Dallas, first time since being traded in February. And the Mavs played a tribute video for him, which got criticized by some, but it's like, the people within the organization that love Luka and the fans and all that, they're not the ones who traded him. So of course they're going to play a tribute video for him. And, he was sitting there on the bench and literally crying. Like he was crying. He had tears coming out of his eyes, and he was, bloodshot eyes and everything. It was a crazy thing to witness. Something that I think, we kind of knew was coming, but I didn't know he would show that much emotion, willingly, especially before a game. And you thought like, well, how's that going to affect how he plays? Didn't affect him at all. It probably galvanized him, honestly, because he came out there and put up 45 points in 38 minutes, shot 16 of 28 from the field, 7 of 10 from three. He hit, let's see, 6 of his 9 free throws, and he had 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and 4 steals. Was a plus 26 for the Lakers in those 38 minutes. So he put on a show. He took it to the Mavs. Just, we wouldn't have expected anything else. It was surreal, DJ. The Mavs fans, they were cheering both ways. That if the Mavs did something good, they were cheering. If Luka touched the ball, they screamed loudly, and especially if he hit a bucket. It was it was like a one-of-one experience. I don't think any other team in NBA history has experienced anything like what happened, which goes to show you just how unpopular of a trade it was. But, the Lakers ended up winning 112-97. I'll give a few more thoughts on this situation, but what were your initial feelings, as you were watching that?
At the very beginning of it, whenever they showed the tribute video, I was actually sitting in church, I believe. And like it was Wednesday night. We always have, meals or whatever, like we always eat at church. And so I was watching that while we were eating, and I literally lost my appetite. And as you know me, it takes a lot for me to lose my appetite because I like to eat, especially good old lady cooking, which is what was being had that night. Like, it's always fantastic, but it's a mixture of sadness, anger, and disgust. I'm sad for Luka, but I'm also sad for the city of Dallas, and I'm sad for, the Dallas Mavericks organization, because it could be 20 years before we recover from this. 20 years. That's how often a player of Luka's caliber comes around.
It could be more than that.
It could be, because I'm going to tell you this, and, if Luka holds up, and if Luka plays the same way, for the rest of his career, or at least for the majority of his career, and that career spans at least 12 years, Luka could go down as top 10 player all time. And to think, and I think that might be undershooting it if you really consider the potential of a point guard who's about 6'8", 250 pounds, can get by anybody, can get his shot on anybody. And the only quote unquote knock on him is his defense, which sometimes can be shoddy, whenever he's hurt. But then he can turn around and have a big defensive game like he did against us. So I don't think that the defense is as much of a concern. But if what he has right now, like no improvement at all, takes place, if he is just able to go at this pace for the next 10 to 12 years, I think you're looking at a top 5 player all time. Because who else fills the stat sheet like he does? Yeah. Who else can do everything offensively that you could ever ask for?
And it's not empty stats either. He does all this while contributing to winning. You look at where the Lakers were at the time of the trade. They were barely hanging on. They were closer to 9th in the Western Conference standings than they were to the 3 seed where they ended up when the regular season ended. They were right there, and I think they were at 6th at the time. But still, I mean, look, you look at where they were at the trade, and they were closer to being a play-in team than they were to securing home court and being a legit contender. And, credit to Rob Pelinka for pulling off this heist and grooming Nico, apparently. I don't know what. Okay. I take it back. I feel like that would be something that would have happened just because of how absurd it is. But by all accounts, Nico was the one who approached Rob Pelinka. So I can't say that.
That's crazy to think about because, building off of what I was just saying, you went and traded a guy who, that's that caliber, that could be a top 5 player all time, for a guy who isn't even top 5 in his position in today's NBA. He's not.
Yeah.
Let that sink in.
Especially depending on what position you want to put him at, too. And he wants to be a 4. He's really a 5.
He wants to be a point guard. They have him running point guard out there sometimes. That's the thing. They got to,
they kind of have to.
No disrespect to Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is a very capable player. He's a fantastic defender. But to say that trading Luka for AD is an equivalent trade is absolute madness.
Yeah.
It's madness. And another thing, just look at what has happened to the team since then. Granted, Dallas has had a ton of injuries. But I remember Windhorst saying at the conclusion of the trade that LA had better title odds than Dallas did at that point and how ridiculous that was. Well, injuries aside, look at how quickly LA took off. Look at how much Luka impacts winning. And I dare say that with all the injuries that have occurred, if we had Luka Doncic as opposed to Anthony Davis, we would be in much better position in terms of playoff contingency. And nobody can tell me differently.
Yeah, especially with the bigs coming back.
Yes, exactly.
Lively and Gafford coming back when they did. They came back and they haven't really affected anything now because, obviously Kyrie's out for the, he blew out his ACL. He won't be back until, even the best case scenario would be like New Year's, I would think. But more than likely it might be a little bit longer than that. But, look, if those bigs, they came back from their injuries and it really hasn't affected anything because the Mavs don't have any ball handling.
Right.
And, Luka, as much as we want to talk about, how good Derek Lively was as a rookie, and especially like in that Western Conference Finals against the Timberwolves, when he went 100% from the field in the 4 games he played, a lot of that had to do with Luka. And, I was thinking about it because now that the Western Conference or the whole NBA playoff landscape is shaping up, the Lakers, they're going to be playing the Timberwolves in the first round of the playoffs. So Luka's eyes are going to light up because he's playing against Gobert again. And I want to see, because we know it's probably going to happen. I want to see what kind of series Jackson Hayes has against the Timberwolves, because if he goes out there and looks like Derek Lively did in the Western Conference Finals, we're going to have some tough conversations about Derek Lively. Now, look, I'm not throwing off on Lively. He is very talented. He has a ton of potential going forward, especially if the Mavs will let loose and let him start to shoot the ball a little bit, which we know he's capable of doing. But I'm just saying, if Gobert gets carved up again and Jackson Hayes ends up looking like Derek Lively did in the Western Conference Finals last year, we know it confirms what we already thought, that the Luka boost is very real.
Well, that's no question. Question.
Yeah. So, and then we'll all have an empty pit feeling in our stomach again. So,
well, I don't think that if Hayes does play well on the offensive end, I don't think it's quite as alarming to me because I know that Derek Lively gives you more defensively. I think that Derek Lively is a better two-way player. And like you said, I think Derek Lively has a much higher ceiling than Jackson Hayes. And, we've seen a little bit of, development as far as like guard skills are concerned. Like I said, I think even if Jackson Hayes has a good series, which I think he ultimately will, I don't think that negatively impacts my opinion of Lively. But it does show how much of an effect that Luka has on how well post players play and how well he is able to set up people around the rim. I think that more so speaks to Luka's skill and his ability to make others better rather than, lessens my opinion of Lively.
Yeah.
Because I will say, a lot of Lively's offensive inadequacies were hidden by Luka. I never had any vision that Lively was going to be this tremendous back to the basket player. He's not. What's interesting about Lively is he has really good coordination, really good feet right now. He's incredibly athletic and he's teachable. And I think he has a higher basketball IQ than a lot of people in his position do. And I think that because of that, paired with some skills that I don't think we get to see very often, I think he could be an incredibly good player by year 5. I really do. Maybe even year 3.
Yeah. I mean, look, as down as we have been about the trade, and, it hurts seeing how the Lakers have been elevated, like from day one, even while Luka was still working his way, back into playing shape after missing over 2 months of action, they were still winning games.
Yep.
He had a hiccup every now and then, didn't have a great performance, but overall they have just been elevated and it hurts. But on the flip side of that, even though I don't think the Mavs ceiling is near what it was, this isn't going to be a bad basketball team going forward if they add the ball handling that we know is needed. Even having Brandon Williams back for the play-in is going to help them, a lot more than what they've been throwing out there the last couple of weeks. If he plays in the play-in, he came back for that last game the last 2 games of the regular season, and I saw he got injured in the last one. So we'll see if that's a serious thing or if he's able to play Wednesday. But I'm interested in seeing what this team looks like with, and we don't know how Kyrie's going to be, but let's just say a legitimate ball handler. Let's say Max Christie gets elevated to the starting 2 next year, and he's still young, and we've seen what he can do. PJ Washington, assuming he isn't traded for Kevin Durant.
Yeah, that's another discussion.
Anthony Davis and Derek Lively. I'd like to see what that looks like with some continuity. And then, maybe that helps things a little bit, because one way to get over something as shocking, depressing, whatever you want to call the Luka trade, there's 2 ways you can get over it. One, you have enough time pass to where it just helps, because time heals all wounds. Maybe not completely, but it helps the further away you get from it. So that's one way. The other way is if the Mavs would win some games.
Yeah.
And that just hasn't happened. And like you said earlier, a lot of that has to do with the injury situation.
It does.
But you kind of put yourself into that situation too if you're Mavs management. Like you traded Luka thinking he was going to break down, and you traded him for an older player who has a history of breaking down. And then, you trade Quentin Grimes, who's 24 years old.
And is cranking out 30 balls for Philly.
Man, he had almost 51 game. Or he did have 51 game.
Terrible trade.
Just shooting outstanding from deep. And he can handle the ball a little bit too, which would have been greatly needed. Not only did they
dog on defense. I mean, he does it all for him. Like,
not only did they trade Grimes to Philly for Caleb Martin, who has the ugliest shot I've ever seen. Now, look, Caleb Martin is better than what he has advertised so far in his short stint in Dallas, but man, he's been bad. He has been so bad. And not only did that trade happen, but the Mavs gave the Sixers their second round pick back. That, it was Philly's pick that Dallas owned, and they sent Philly their pick back in that trade, which is number 35 in this upcoming draft. Unbelievable stuff that happened at this year's trade deadline. I can believe it based on what happened with the Luka trade. I can believe that the Grimes thing happened. I don't accept it.
Yeah.
it just kind of feels like malpractice. But yeah, look, going back to the Luka stuff, I was emotional watching that. It made me feel things I didn't want to feel. And it's a betrayal. It came out of nowhere. He knew that. He would have never gone anywhere. He would have stayed his entire career in Dallas. I read a piece by my guy Kenny on Twitter. He went and he wrote an independent piece, talking about his emotions through these last few months after the trade that he just now had gotten around to wanting to post. And he made a point to where he was in attendance for that for Dirk's last home game, the 41-21-1, the big celebration of his career. And he said one part of it that made it so special was that Luka was right there taking it all in. That was supposed to make Luka feel like, hey, this could be me one day. Like, I'm never going to leave. I'm going to be loyal to this franchise. This is what's going to happen with me one day. And it worked. It worked. He was going to be that. It worked. And then the rug got pulled out from under him. So it reopened some feelings for me. I hated it. But I also came away seeing Luka being that emotional in that moment. And people are going to call me delusional for saying this, but he's going to come back to Dallas. He's going to come back to the Mavs once we get past this Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd era. And, some people say, well, Dumont doesn't have to, he's going to have to be out of there too. He could be. I mean, I don't think he's going to be the governor of the team long term. I think he's going to be out of there at some point too. But I think once we get past this Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd era, Luka's going to come back to Dallas. The connection is too strong between him and the city and the fans for the actions of one or two knuckleheads who don't have any idea what they're doing to completely break that. And I think deep down, Luka knows that. He knows this wasn't, something that anybody but a couple of people did to him. And I think his love for the city and the fans and wanting to finish what he started will fuel him eventually coming back. I think it's going to happen at some point. People, like I said, people are going to hear that and think I'm delusional and I'm just being, emotional and coping and all that. I truly believe it's going to happen, and it's going to be great when it does. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I think it'll happen before he exits his prime years.
Well, before I say anything, I just want you to know that I hope you're right. I hope to God you're right. But there are a few things that I think have to happen that are non-negotiables. First, the obvious. The three people involved need to be gone. And I do include DeMont. I don't think after the comments that were made, I just don't think he comes back with that guy in position. Now, I could be wrong. I was wrong several years back about LeBron returning to Cleveland. I didn't think I'd ever see that happen. And lo and behold, it did, despite comments made by Dan Gilbert. So maybe it's possible. But the other thing is this. You got to wonder how Luka likes life in LA, because those people worship him too. However, I could see it taking place if for some reason they have a bad year or two or three, which is entirely possible after LeBron retires, that, they take a downward turn. If that happens, do the fans stay as loyal? I wouldn't say loyal, but as Luka crazy as they are. Because
Look,
LA fans can be nasty.
I've already seen them be nasty, DJ. I've seen, knowing that Luka had missed the last 2 months, before he made his Lakers debut, he has had a couple of really, really bad games, like some of the worst Luka games we've seen in a while. Now, he's had some really good ones too, but he's been pretty volatile, since he's suited up for the Lakers. And some of the stuff I see online is crazy. Like, for him to just now be getting his feet wet, and he's coming off that injury, and he hasn't truly taken off from basketball in like 2 years. It's crazy to see some of the stuff that I've seen, but I've come to expect that from Lakers fans over the years. The spotlight is great. He's going to have all these extra sponsorship opportunities. We've already seen, Jordan Brand and Gatorade roll out the red carpet for him. Now that he's in LA, they're doing stuff that they never even thought of doing when he was in Dallas. And it's unfortunate that it took this for that to happen. So you have that going for you. When you're good, everybody, the whole city's behind you, and he has the murals and, all that stuff. But man, when he's bad, he is going to get it. Like it is, there's not going to be any mercy from Lakers fans. We saw it with Russell Westbrook in his stint there, and we've seen it with several players over the years. So I don't know,
man. There were times we saw it with Kobe, man. I mean, there were times whenever Lakers fans weren't the biggest fans of Kobe Bryant during some of the tough years with Bryant. So, I mean, it's a very, they're very inconsistent with, where their loyalties lie. And, when you're up, you're up. And when you're down, I mean, nobody can save you.
Well, and I know he probably likes being out there, close to the beach and all that stuff, but you're always just a plane ride away from being over there. I mean, it's not, I know it's different living there and having access to it all the time, but I'm not prepared to discount just how much he cares for the city of Dallas and the fan base. And he knows that it wasn't just him that was cheated. It was the rest of us too. It wasn't just him. It was a lot him, because he was uprooted, and they also cost him over $100 million by sending him off. But it's not just that. Like, everybody involved feels cheated by this. And I think he'll eventually want to tie up that loose end that he wasn't able to because it was out of his control. And I think, and look, I mean, I'm with you. I think DeMont has to probably be gone too. There has to be I think Adelson can still own the team, but there has to be a different governor, given the comments he made. Now there is a situation like with the Dan Gilbert stuff, DeMont could come out and say, look, I don't know ball. I let
He
Nico
don't.
he does not. He can come out and say, I don't know ball. I let Nico manipulate me at the time, and he talked me into doing something I should not have done. He can apologize to Luka, and maybe there's something you can get done there. But I think it'll be a clean house eventually. Maybe not with, like I said, I think Adelson will still on the team, but I think you have a new governor, a new GM, and a new head coach. And then you can start kind of plotting to make that reunion later down the line. But I think it's going to happen, DJ. Like I said, I know people are quick to push back on that. I posted that on X earlier, and there's so many people just like, man, you're coping hard, and I get it. I understand why people feel that way, but bookmark it. He is going to come back, and it's going to be great when he does, because that's going to be the closure everybody's looking for. And there might be some fun times between now and then, depending on how healthy this roster can be in the next couple of years. But man, look, this is our last topic before we'll jump off here. I was going to talk about the play-in some, but I mean, who really cares that much about the play-in? They play the Sacramento Kings in Sacramento on Wednesday, and they haven't beaten the Kings once this year. Anthony Davis's record against Domantas Sabonis is awful. Zach LaVine is like the top 3-point shooter in the league percentage-wise. They can't ever stop DeRozan. He always roasts them. I just have zero faith in this team winning in the play-in, and they're tied with the Bulls for the 12th best odds in the lottery. So we might as well go ahead and book it. We're getting the 13th pick because we're not going to win that coin flip. So there's my there's my Debbie Downer take on the Mavs play-in situation. But look, what I wanted to end on here was Nico Harrison and Jason Kidd. We know they're not going to be here long term. I would argue they need to be gone before the draft,
That'd be optimal.
Especially this draft. You only own your picks this year and next year, and then it's dicey from 2017 to 2030. So you got to take advantage, and I feel like the only way that happens is if Kidd and Nico are gone before the draft. So it kind of makes you want to root for Luka. I just can't say the Lakers, but it kind of makes you want to root for Luka.
Root for Luka.
Root for Luka. Go ahead and get your first title. And, then that forces Dumont hand like, hey, we got to – this ended up being the worst trade in history. We just handed the Lakers a title. And then you can rebuild the right way, starting with the draft instead of having the pick traded for Kevin Durant. So, Kevin Durant is great, all-time great, one of the best players we've ever seen. He's also 36 going on 37, and you don't trade multiple draft picks for a guy like that. And I think he's going to be like in the last year of his contract too. So
not good.
That's not what you want to do. You don't want to gut the team and your draft assets for a guy that's aging and in the last year of his contract. But Nico Harrison is now in a position where he's probably desperate enough to do something like that, which is why I think the plug has to be pulled before we get to the draft. And then if that results in having to trade Anthony Davis, if that results in having to trade Kyrie Irving, whatever that entails, I'm ready for it, because we need, I'd like to try and make it work with those players, and rebuild the correct way and add, really good prospects in this draft and all that good stuff. But if it isn't going to work, fine. You sell to the highest bidder. You get some young players, some draft picks, and you go from there. You restart fresh, and that's just where I'm at now. Maybe we, everybody gets healthy. Kyrie comes back, and they trade for Kevin Durant, and that team ends up winning a championship at some point. But it's really hard for me to see that materializing at this point in time.
Yeah. So going back, I'm about to rewind it a little bit, but you'll see why. For your Luka hypothesis or prediction to come true, we have to have a supporting cast suitable for him to come back and be able to compete immediately. And that only happens if we get rid of Nico and Kidd, especially Nico, because, like you said, Nico is going to I'm sorry, what's going on with the screen?
I'm just showing people our design. You can keep talking. They can hear us.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You'll have to click that. Anyway, like you said, Nico is going to trade that draft pick for Kevin Durant. I don't think it's an if. I think it's a win, and I think that is an eventuality no matter what. If you want to keep hope alive that you can build a roster suitable for the future, which even if you do get Kevin Durant, it is not suitable for the future. That is completely, it has to be a win now move because, like you said, he's ancient in terms of basketball years. Like, we're not going to have the trio of him, Kyrie, and AD, for very long. And if we do, the effectiveness isn't going to be present for very long, just because that's how age works, guys. So we have to get rid of Nico. We have to, sooner rather than later. I think that is a requirement if we're going to be able to build this team back in time for a potential Luka return.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten to that point to where Nico Harrison is now the odds-on favorite at Vegas to be the next GM fired, which ended up not being true because the Pelicans let go of David Griffin today. But it's everybody is just sitting and watching and waiting to see when this implodes, because this isn't even just about trading Luka at this point now. This is about, the franchise losing millions and millions of dollars in ticket sales and merchandise sales and, all the other stuff that makes it'll make the owners think, hey, maybe this was not a good idea at all. So there's a lot of different things that factor into it. And I think we're eventually going to get to that ending of both Nico and Kidd being out of here. The question is, when will it happen? Will it happen after they lose in the play-in? If they make the playoffs and, have a good showing against OKC, does that buy them some extra time? Does ownership look at all the injuries that they had this season, and no matter what happens in the postseason, do they say, well, there were so many injuries, we're going to give them one more year?
That's what I'm afraid of, and that's what I can see happening.
I think probably the most likely outcome, honestly.
Yep, that's what I think too. I think that's what's most likely, and because of that, they're going to trade that pick for Kevin Durant. That's happening. I think that there's an 80% chance of that happening.
Unless they get lucky if they lose in the play-in, they get lucky in the lottery and get the number one pick in the draft, which I think if that happened, I don't even think they'd keep the pick then and use it. I think at that point they go for Giannis or something like that. So
that changes things a little bit. Giannis is pretty solid right now. So I don't know. I don't see that happening either. Sorry. I just don't think that happens. Even though that would be just desserts. If Adam Silver was behind all of this and he is rigging everything as we speak, we deserve the number one pick, Adam. Like, you did irreparable damage. There isn't going to be another Luka Doncic for 20, 25 years. You got to throw us a bone, man.
It's kind of crazy because even if this is, say it's not a conspiracy, say the NBA didn't have its hands in on this and, it coordinated this to save the Lakers and all that stuff, all the theories we've seen out there. Even if this was just Nico being dumb and trading Luka on his own accord because he has that much belief in Anthony Davis,
That's crazy.
Even if the league ended up, like if the Mavs ended up with the number 1 overall pick, then people would be 110% convinced that it was an inside job by Adam Silver. So there's really no winning situation for Silver. But man, if the Mavs, they've never moved up in the lottery in their franchise history, it would be a hell of a time for that to become the first time ever this season, especially in this draft. So
listen, I'd settle for number 2. Give us Dylan Harper. I'd be down. That would help.
Or a top 4 pick and get Ace Bailey. I mean,
I've kind of dropped a little bit on him. I don't know. We'll talk about it in our draft.
Oh yeah. One thing that's one upside to all this depression and drama we've had over the last couple months. We get to focus more on draft stuff until the pick is traded.
That's fun. We like draft stuff.
But guys, look, we're going to end it there. Just wanted to come and talk about our feelings following that Luka reunion, or his homecoming, first time since the trade. And like I said, I wish that I had it in me to talk more about this play-in matchup coming up, but I don't feel good about it. We talked about it before. If they make the playoffs, I'm going to be irrationally confident again because it's OKC, and we know what PJ Washington does to OKC. But getting there is going to be a really tall task. And I don't expect them to beat Sacramento, but if they do beat Sacramento, then they're going to have to beat either the Warriors or the Grizzlies in that second game. And I don't see that happening either. So, we'll see. If they end up playing the Grizzlies in a play-in game for the 8 seed, we might have to make a trip up to Memphis, though.
That'd be sweet. I kind of hope we do it then.
Cool. Get something good out of all this. So, well, guys, look, we appreciate it. Hope y'all have a great rest of your week. Be safe out there. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.